Washington has its most important building block.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He's site editor with Athlon Sports Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet and you can start with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Lars got a really fun show coming at all the everydayers on this Monday, where we're going to talk some transfer portal, because after what we saw on Saturday night against Oregon, we kind of have to, right? Like there is nothing left to talk about but what that could look like, especially when we talk about the trenches. We're going to have a real long discussion about that when we talk about how far away Washington might be from competing in the Big Ten. But we're going to start with something a little positive, to start a Monday off on the right note here, where Washington has its most important piece. And obviously, that's quarterback Demond Williams, where one thing that I don't know if we necessarily gave enough love to last night is, despite the situation he was in against Oregon, 10 sacks, he completed 17 of 20 passes for 201 yards and a touchdown. That's really impressive.
Yeah, I mean, like that. Well, it's I guess maybe it was the unspoken part of it that we kind of just said everything but the exact phraseology, because Demond didn't have an interception. Only through, as you said, 3 incomplete passes. Yes, he had the fumble to Jonah, but like, if you can count the mistakes that Demond had on one hand in his first start at number 1 Oregon, like, that's a good thing. Like, nobody expected Demond to go in and win that game. I know I threw out the Jaden Daniels thing 2 weeks ago when that game was at Arizona State, as you pointed out. So maybe if this game is at Husky Stadium, does Demond and UW and the offensive line have a little more fire and anything like that? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe they still lose by the exact same score. So it wasn't necessarily that, like, there's nothing. The only thing that you can do about Demond is nitpick, which is fine, because that's what Jedd's going to do. And that's what Jedd should do. Much like when I asked him, when I asked Demond, how many of those sacks would you say were on you, and how many were, maybe just Oregon's pass rush. And because I wasn't asking him to throw the offensive line under the bus. I was more or less saying, like, how much of that was just sheer pressure? Like, when Oregon's bringing 5 and you got, or 6 and whatever, and except they were bringing 4 most of the time, so it didn't even matter. But the point being, it's like, how much of that was like my way of saying, like, could you have thrown the ball away quicker and whatever? And Demond, without even, I don't even know if I finished the sentence. And Demond was like, no, that's all on me. All of them are on me.
Sure.
Like, without even hesitating. That's what Jedd's like, well, we coached him up the right way, because that's what he should say. And the offensive line would say the same thing, and the running backs would say the same thing, and the receivers would say they should get open more, and everything together. So nothing was bad about what happened, except it's just unfortunate they lost.
So I really love where you're going with that, because that was one of the things that really stood out. It's something that we've heard about all season long and got to see for a full game for the first time, and that's Demond's leadership ability, where it's something where that's a true freshman in that situation, and he did a really good job of staying composed, and he still made true freshman mistakes. We know that, because that's what's going to happen when you're making your first career start against the number 1 team in the country on the road. Those are still things that are going to happen. He held the ball too long. He tried to make plays at certain points, and he got happy feet. He did certain things that we know true freshmen are going to do. But you look at everything he did in that game. Like you talk about, and it comes down to the post-game press conference too, where all of those things, you look at that and you say, I am really confident in that guy moving forward. And that's a really, really great sign for a program where it's, you look around the country and you see a lot of uncertainty at quarterback. You look at the transfer portal, and assuming Washington State quarterback John Mateer ends up entering, like, he's probably going to be somebody who's going to command we'll see what that looks like. But I look at that and I say, if that's a guy who's going to be one of the hottest commodities, and you look at Washington and you say, you have somebody who's going to be a true sophomore who you were really happy with the way he played in this first season as a true freshman. Lars, as you pointed out, he has not thrown an interception this year. Like, things like that are critical. And I look at that and I say, moving forward, there's going to be so much more to build on. And like we talked about a little bit yesterday, you think about the skill positions. You think about what another year along the offensive line is going to look like, plus potential investments through the transfer portal. All of a sudden, this could be an offense that really takes a huge step forward next year.
Yeah, and it's one of those where, as you were saying that, I was thinking of some other quarterbacks that are freshmen that have played this year, Dylan Lagway and Dylan Raiola at Nebraska. and Dylan Lagway at Florida, to be clear, not Nebraska. But with that being
DJ
said,
Lagway, yeah.
or DJ Lagway, yeah. But both of those guys and those situations, like if you just say three different conferences, 3 different schools, 3 different coaches, situations, which one would you rather take? I know we're probably a little bit biased here by saying Washington, but it's the same thing last season where it's like everybody, oh, nobody expected Washington to make the national title run. It's like, go look at our videos from the last 6 months. Like, we all were predicting this up here, but nobody pays attention up here. I really think Washington and Jedd Fisch with DeMond Williams is in a better position with the way they did it this season moving forward than what Dylan Raiola in Nebraska did or what DJ and Billy Napier did, because you look at all those situations and it's Jedd knows what he's got to fix, knows how to tinker with DeMond, and that's kind of what he alluded to in the postgame as well. But it's like, now we know we have to work. Now we know, like, now I can grade a whole game film. Now I can't ask Jedd. It's like, hey, since DeMond hasn't started the game yet, do you have confidence? And I think looking back at the way Jedd answered that question 3 weeks ago or 2 weeks ago, whatever it was, and he's like, yeah, I have total confidence in DeMond. It was like so casual. It's like, okay, like now we hadn't seen it. We hadn't seen him start and finish a game. We saw him finish a game, and he looked pretty good doing that. But it's always kind of easier coming off the bench, nothing to lose, let it rip, whatever. But even DeMond, I don't think has played like the let it rip kind of guy. When I mean that constructively, in the sense of like he's let it rip. He had the deep shots to win to Denzel. But I mean, he's not making careless throws. He's not making bad, read after read after read and just kind of throwing the ball away and really not, and kind of almost just playing like a deer in headlights freshman where it's like, oh, I have all this, ability and speed and potential, but I can't harness it. We've seen DeMond harness that, talent specifically against Oregon, but throughout the season, and we've seen him get better and better. And so when you look at next season, it's, oh, well, DeMond's only a 2-time starter and, he's a true sophomore with a rebuilt offensive line. It's like, right. But I would rather take DeMond and Jedd in that situation, knowing that, by the way, no shot at Will again, but that DeMond is now the guy that Jedd wants and how he schemes his offense open. And so that's like plays into Jedd Fisch's hands even more. And so all of these things are trajectorying up.
So I think that's the biggest thing right there. It's the freedom, where one of the biggest criticisms you and I have had on this show of Jedd Fisch all season long is the play calling, where there were still points last night where it didn't necessarily look great with a full game of DeMond. And you look at it, and I think Zion Tupuola-Fatu is the one who said it on Twitter, where it said, you've had an entire season to find a way to scheme around this offensive line, and you haven't found a way to do that yet. And I think he makes a fair point there, but at the same in the same vein, you can look at it and say, all right, with another year to build everything the way that you want, which is what your messaging has been the entire time, where he hasn't thrown people under the bus, but he said, this is going to take time. We want to build it in a certain way, which I think are all fair points. Now we look at what we saw yesterday, and obviously it's going to look a little different in 2025 with more experience, with more just comfortability in the system, whatever it is you want to call it. And you can say, you expect things to take a step forward no matter what. But in the exact same vein, you can look at it, you can say, Jedd is all of a sudden, I think that we're going to see just a very different play caller next year. That's something that I want to say, I think it's going to change because it's going to fit him way better. We know what the offense is going to look like with DeMond at the helm. And we've seen it where I was talking to our good buddy Spencer McLaughlin about it earlier today. We're talking about no Fito down in Arizona. We saw what that looked like in 2023, where he gave him the freedom to do what he wanted. We saw what that offense looked like with a solid offensive line. And that's what we need to see, where we know DeMond has the ability to cover up some holes in the offensive line. Obviously, it didn't work out against Oregon when you're consistently getting pressure with 4, but with another year for the guys on the offensive line to get bigger, stronger, to get more ingrained in the system, where there were a couple of those sacks where I looked at it and I saw just a complete failure in protection. And moving forward, when I look at that, I see, all right, these things are things that can be year one issues, especially we saw it pointed out in our live chat after the game a few times, with a brand new offensive line that hadn't played a game together entering the season, and you're still consistently shuffling pieces around up front. Going forward, I don't expect those things to be issues. I think they're going to be mitigated, and we're going to see a very different Washington team in 2025, which poses the question, Lars, how far away is this team from competing in the Big Ten? which we'll get to right after message from our good friends over at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. And with Monday Night Football coming up a little bit later today, couple prop bets that I really like. David Njoku over in catches. I think that Jameis Winston's going to go to him pretty often, especially with Cedric Tillman out. And give me Nick Chubb anytime touchdown. One of my favorite players in the league. Always love betting on that guy. So Lars, when we look at this Washington team, we saw at various points this season because Washington's played 3 opponents that have finished their season in the top 10. Oregon, Penn State, and Indiana. And in all 3 of those games, we saw them get manhandled physically. So the question is, do you think this team could compete next year? Is this a 2-year, 3-year sort of project?
I mean, you should. I set the bar at 10-2 next season, and I don't necessarily think, but it's kind of like 8-4 this season, where you had the position to be 8-4 with Rutgers and Wazoo. You didn't, but you also beat Michigan, a top 10 team. You beat both the LA schools. So there's positives and negatives. But the reason why I say it's more so next year, as you pointed out previously, the schedule lines up better next year. All those games are at home. Ohio State's at home. Most of that roster, and who knows, maybe Ryan Day is gone by next time Ohio State gets done. I would not be surprised. Honestly.
No, neither would I.
Born on third base, can't even get home. But the point being is that, and also kind of ironic that Emeka and JTT have 0 wins over Michigan, and at least anybody on Washington's roster has 1. Real ironic, because the one game this season is really ironic in that whole twist of fate. But the point that I'm making here is I think there's enough coming back, when you look at the offense and talk about Jonah, Denzel, Audric, Kevin Green, who
Rashid Williams,
and those guys, and then you have Max McCree, you have Drew Azzopardi, you have potentially guard, whether he stays or goes,
Pocky Finau, Landon
Hatchett, right? There's all those pieces, but you still need to, as we said on the show last night, you still got to add pieces in the portal in the offensive line. You cannot run that back and say, oh, well, Landon is a full year in this. And it's like, that's great. I'm not opposed to that. But as we saw this season, and specifically against Oregon, Enoch actually had the best pass blocking grade. The only one above 80 last night. Came in for 16 snaps at left guard. Everybody else was in the 40s and 50s. So those are the reasons why, hey, go get a grad, 5th-year transfer who hasn't started somewhere else. Maybe he can kind of shine, because Enoch's been one of the more consistent guys in terms of when you look at the whole season along the offensive line. And so getting that transfer, you're not splurging, 1.5 on Enoch, and that's not a shot at Enoch, but you can supplement some transfers up there. And then you look defensively. You get the injury guys back. You get the Parker brothers back. Durfee probably is coming back. You look at a bunch of those guys, but then you have to supplant the linebacker position. And I swear to God, we love John Richardson, but watching how open some of those guys were last night, was it the Trayshawn Holden touchdown where Prysock was a solid 15 yards away from Holden at the time of the catch? And I'm not putting that just on Prysock, but even Jedd said, with Prysock getting bigger, these guys, it's like, so all these guys are going to be coming back, obviously. Thad's the only one you're replacing in that situation. We see from George Shaw. So all the pieces are there, but I still need to see what you add in the portal before I say, is it a guaranteed to, or is it like Arizona, where it's maybe you're 9-3 next season, and then you're 10-2, 11-2, 13-1, whatever you want to call it in year 3, with DeMond's last season and that sort of thing, because that would obviously be a safer assumption. But I think they can get the job done next year. It's just you have to hit the portal hard, and again, as you said the first segment, you got the dudes to recruit to do it.
So I'm going to save some of my portal thoughts for the third segment, because I want to talk about this defensive front, because this is the thing where, we've seen some consistencies, like in terms of, Kamori has gotten better week in and week out. He had one bad play where he just took a bad angle to Dylan Gabriel and let him get outside the pocket and skip the contain and pick up a first down. But that's a guy who you're really going to rely on next year, and that's great. And you've got, a couple freshmen that you're going to mix in the rotation, where Zaydus Rainey-Sale is going to be a fantastic player. I love what that's going to look like. I'm really excited for him, but you still need to find a way to get a transfer guy in at that position. But that's the least of my worries, in my opinion. I look at the defensive backfield and I say they're going to figure that out, whether it be in-house or through the transfer portal. I look at the defensive line and I say I have a lot of questions. You brought this up on the postgame show, and you made a fantastic point of we are huge fans of the Parker brothers. We are huge fans of Zach Durfee. They have not played very much this year. Obviously, Armon Parker has not taken a snap yet in his UW career. We know how talented he is. We know how talented his brother is. We've seen how good he is. And Armon was supposed to be the more highly touted guy coming out of high school. That's a long ways off now, obviously. But if you want to rely on those guys, that's great. But that is the position where again, and these are all things I said on the postgame show, but it needs to be emphasized. Our buddy Mike Farrell, friend of the show, did a really great job doing that in the Seattle Times today, where he said Jedd needs to go find a way to get these blue chip offensive and defensive line players. And the defensive line is where it especially needs to be, where I look at edge rusher. With Zach Durfee, I'm really confident in that position next season. Hopefully Russell Davis comes back healthy, but you look at Lance Holtzclaw, Jaden Wayne, Jacob Lane, Isaiah Ward, Russell Davis, whoever you want to say in that room, and you say, all right, that's a position that I really like. Because when I look at this entire defense as a whole, that's where the problems started this season. And it was just because you simply were not deep enough. And part of that comes from when Jedd took the job. That part of that came from who he actually had to recruit from, which is not his fault. And we're not trying to make excuses, but you have to make do with what's available to you in the world of college football. And when I look at this and I look at what I want to see, I want to see them go out and whatever capital they have to invest, they need to bring in these highly productive guys. Lars, one person that I think of is like a Joey Slackman, who you talked to in this previous cycle. We're getting Sebastian Valdez was great, and he's been impactful at times this year, but it was shown that it was not enough. And we look at guys in the room. I think Alinius Davis, Bryce Butler, Omar Khan. These are guys who are going to take a step forward next year. Obviously, Jayvon and Armon if they come back healthy, but that's not enough. We saw that because we have seen so many times over the last couple of seasons what you really need to compete for a national championship year in and year out, because you and I both believe Washington can do that, but it starts at defensive tackle. That's where it starts. You look at all of these great programs around the country, because this is something that I think about really often, and this is just me being the number one Vita Vea fan on this planet. And I think about the 2016 Peach Bowl game against Alabama. He was the one guy on that field who really truly looked like he belonged physically, where there were points where Sidney Jones and Kevin King were all out physical. There are points where Budda Baker looked absolutely fantastic, but there were points where he looked like he still had a little bit of ways to go. He has certainly made up for it since then. Shout out to Budda. He's having a fantastic year. But you looked at Vita Vea, because like even Elijah Qualls and Greg Gaines, they were not there yet. But you looked at Vita Vea and you said, that guy can compete. And then you saw it again in the Fiesta Bowl the next year when they played Penn State. Again, you lost that game because you didn't have it yet. But you looked at Vita and you said, that's why that dude's going to be a top 10 pick. You don't have that guy right now. And that's no slight to anybody in the room, because I think Jayvon's ceiling is very, very high. I think some of the guys can have very, very productive seasons, but you don't have somebody who looks like Mason Graham, who looks like Kenneth Grant, who looks like the Derek Harmon. Like, honestly, you don't have one of those first round, I am going to collapse the pocket every single time I step on the field guys. And I want to, we'll see what the portal looks like, but that's what you really need to see.
But that's the crux of the problem, is you're reaching into an anonymous bag. Like you can, I know, because I'm 120% with you in the sense of you have to go get at least two portal defensive linemen that are going to be in the two deeps, if not three. Just because when you're looking at that room, and we thought Bryce would be a piece, and I think you can. It's a quality or quantity. This year was quantity.
It's quality.
No. But I'm saying, like, this year they had quantity, but not quality. Next year, like, you can have 6, 7, 8 guys in the rotation, but it's like, right, in reality, that rotation should be about 4, like 3, 4, 5 max. No, I'm saying at edge. At edge, and then you look at tackle, you probably have another 4 or 5 mixed in there.
No, I still disagree.
I mean, the problem is, like, they haven't coached it up. Like, that's also the other side of the equation.
Sure.
And then, let's call a spade, because, like, who on the defensive line interiorly has gotten better from week 1 to week 12?
Alenius Davis, 100%. Like that's the number one name that I would point to.
But that's one name. Then that's the problem. It should be at least 3 or 4. No.
But I would say the same thing about Jayvon Parker, but we can't have that discussion because he tore his Achilles. Like I look at Isaiah Ward, I think that guy's gotten better this year. I look at Jacob Lane, that dude has absolutely gotten better this year. I don't. The reason I disagree is because what do all these great teams have? In terms of, you want to look at the Ohio States that have won championships, the Alabamas, the Clemson team is a fantastic example when they were one of the most dominant forces in college football. They had first round pick after first round pick after first round pick at defensive tackle. Like you think about Dexter Lawrence, like you think about Brian Brzee, all those guys. That's what you think about. You say that defensive line rotation, you have obviously those top guys, but you had them wave after wave after wave of top end talent. And that's what's lacking is because we've seen it. We saw it against Iowa. We saw it against Indiana, against Penn State. We saw it against Oregon. The inability to stop the run where, we've seen people say like, oh, this is on Belichick, where, obviously there's a certain amount where they didn't do a good job of containing guys bouncing the outside against Oregon. But there were also points where everybody's sitting in their gaps and they're still just getting pushed off the ball. And the holes were just gigantic all night long for Jordan James or Noah Whitting to run through. That's not a scheme issue. That's a you're not getting the push necessary issue. And that's what needs to be fixed. And Lars, the best way that this team is going to fix that is through the transfer portal, which we'll get to right after the message from our good friends over at Game Time. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets, which is great news for anybody who wants to go check out Danny Sprinkle and the Husky basketball team because Big Ten Conference play is almost here. The Seahawks, the Kraken. There's so many great deals you can find over on the Game Time app because with Game Time Picks, curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and so much more. With all-in pricing, you can toggle this feature and it shows total upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. And with the lowest price guarantee, Game Time will credit you with 110% of the difference if you find a lower price somewhere else. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. So, Lars, let's jump into this portal discussion. I think we're on the right track when we talk about what needs to change because it is just a bigger, faster, stronger rotation. Like I know that feels like an oversimplification, but that's exactly what it is.
No, it is. But at the same point, I think it's everything combined because, as I'm glad you mentioned Joey Slackman because here's a crazy thought that I didn't even realize until right now. Who has more pressures if you had to guess, Joey Slackman or Sebastian Valdez?
I'm going to say Valdez by like 1.
It's Valdez by over a dozen.
Oh, wow.
And so and the reason why I bring that up is again, because I was absolutely stoked about Joey Slackman, but this is why I make this point. It's not just getting the talent, it's coaching the talent up. And I'm not talking about saying Jason Caruso can't coach, but I'm just saying you have to find the right marriage between the two. And then you have to pair it with Steve Belichick's scheme, and Steve has to call more 4 down fronts and not 3 down fronts. Again, early in the season when you're playing more rushing teams and you're having a 3 down front, it's like, why? When you're going against Oregon, it's like, you know what you're going to face. So part of it, I think, is Steve, kind of like now he'll have a whole year in the Big Ten and know what he's got to get. And not that he didn't know what he was getting into.
Right.
Now Steve can kind of adjust on the fly and say, hey, look, if we can go get these guys, and these guys, then yeah, we could have something here. And so I completely agree with your point.
But but I feel like that points to the point that I was trying to make before the break, which was you need that deeper rotation of elite talent where all of a sudden you feel more comfortable calling those 4 and even 5 down fronts where you have multiple guys like that can get after the quarterback. Like Lars, one of the things that you and I saw in the preseason that we didn't see all year long was like Jayvon Parker lining up on the edge. Like it's things like that where all of a sudden the depth limits that for one way or another. Because I look at the transfer portal, where right now Washington is set to sign 29 high school prospects. We'll see what happens. We're going to do some shows on that later in the week on what might happen on signing day. We'll get there. But as Jedd has said, he wants 10 to 12 guys from the transfer portal. I look at that and I see, all right, I want 3 defensive linemen. I'd say 2 offensive linemen, try to find a way to make that work. Probably 2 guys in the secondary, like a corner and a safety, find a way to make that work. And then I look at the rest of the positions where it's all of a sudden you want a tight end on the offensive side of the ball. Maybe you want to bring in a receiver. I think the Donovan Olubade thing will kind of work that out, which again we'll talk about later in the week. But I look at just the way the numbers might work out, and I'm really curious about all this because I think that this coaching staff has a really great plan that we probably haven't heard 100% of, and we probably never will. But the more I look at it, the more I say, I see where they're heading, and I agree with that direction. The question is, are you going to execute it? Because that's the most important thing.
Right. And how part of that execution comes to being able to have those guys in the portal. But you can't say,
right,
hey, so-and-so, I have a relationship with you. We can offer you, 2.5x. Come jump in the portal. You can't do that. Like, it would be great. Again, like I said on last night's show, if we could, trade players, this would be awesome. But, we're not there yet. And so that's not going to happen. But you look at, like there's some names that I was thinking of, guys that are not in the portal per se, but like a Hiro Kanu, where it's like guys that go to other schools and then kind of just disappear. Like he hasn't had more than 100 snaps in the season. That would be another guy where it's like, hey, if he jumps in the portal, and you go and get him, that's when I'm like, okay, you know what? He doesn't have a lot of production, but we know what he can do. And if you give him the Enoch snaps in the sense of the number of snaps, right? Then run a rotational guy. Now you're an actual starter. Right. That's what you're looking for. Pair one of those two guys with an incumbent, like a guy that you have seen be a starter. Like Alabama's got a couple guys in the portal, and the one person that came to mind right off the bat, not for player, but for a coach that matters with that, Robert Bala. So you have all of these guys where maybe he's not their position coach, but it's like, hey, I was on that staff at Alabama. I helped recruit them when they were on campus. Those are all those little relationships that come into play because you look at Alabama's got two, I think an edge rusher and a D lineman in the portal. I'm not going to touch the edge rusher because of some things that went viral on TikTok. But, there's a 4-star defensive lineman. You can look that up if you want to, people. But if you look at, there's enough bodies that are already kind of listing themselves in the portal on 247 saying, hey, if you can get one of these 3 and then maybe 2 of these 5 in the second, because you're getting Jayvon back. So you don't need 3 guaranteed bona fide starters because then Jayvon looks and says, what about me? And Armon looks and says, what about me? And, and Elenius Davis says, what about me?
But this kind of, but in the same vein though, why would you not do that? And for this reason, where you talked about Jayvon and Armon in particular, where Elenius we know is going to take just a big step forward in terms of the role, in terms of the snaps next season. But you look at Jayvon and Armon and say, which is one of the problems from this season on the offensive line, you didn't have the opportunity to go out and get more guys because they weren't there. You lost out on Marcus Bryant, but then there weren't a lot of and Chris Adams as well, but there weren't a lot of other guys out there that you could go out and say, all right, this is where we want to make just where we think we can make it work in terms of depth, which is why, obviously getting Landon back and getting him playing every game was huge. That was really important for his development. But all of a sudden you're relying on 2 guys that were coming off ACL injuries and you didn't necessarily have the depth behind him outside of true freshmen like Michael Watkins and Paki Finau, who we like them. We think they're going to be good players long-term, but those aren't guys that you want to rely on as freshmen. And it's the same thing at defensive line right now, where it's, absolutely, you want to rely on Jayvon and Armon to take a step forward in their development next season. You love to see that. But at the same point, why not go out and get as many bodies as possible? Because do you know who did that? And do you know who it worked out really well for? Oregon. Because we just saw them do that, where they all their defensive line, like all their defensive linemen, like all the guys that made an impact in that game, I feel like outside of Matayo Uiagalelei were transfers. Derek Harmon, transfer. Like their other defensive tackle, transfer. Jordan Burst, transfer. Like that. Like this is the whole thing. Is you can go out and find those guys, and you can find a way to get snaps for all of them. Because then all of a sudden, like, what was the biggest reason that Michigan won the national championship? Because they had a deep, fresh, powerful defensive line. Like that really is the biggest thing, and it overwhelmed the best offensive line in the country. Because they won the Joe Moore Award and they were overwhelmed by Michigan's defensive line. Like, is that the only reason they lost? No. But was that a huge one? Yes. And this is the thing. You go out and you get those guys, and then all of a sudden you can tell Jayvon and Armon, hey, we want to bring you back slowly. We want to make sure you're healthy. We love you long-term. We love what you can bring with another season of eligibility, which you both have because of the injury. And you look at that and you say, All right, we also got 3 guys who we know can produce. We know we trust these guys to take a bigger, whatever it might be, whether they're just looking for a change of scenery for 1 year or they're looking for a step forward. We know that we can also pair you with all these guys. And then all of a sudden you're 6, 7, 8 deep up front. All of a sudden these run issues that Steve Belichick's scheme is having, those go away because all of a sudden these guys are healthy and you just have all the bodies that you need at the position.
No, I'm 100% with you. The one name that I will throw out there because he is officially on the portal, Jaheim Oatis from Alabama. Former 5-star defensive lineman, defensive tackle. Those are the guys where you look at a guy saying, hey, didn't cut it at Alabama or didn't work out at Alabama. Go prove that you're a 5. Kind of take advantage of those, as a former force. Those are the type of guys that you want to go get because as we saw last year, look, maybe you don't have it. I mean, you have it in the conference to go pay for whoever you want. But let's say you lose out to an Auburn or a Florida or Georgia or whatever have you. There's still some guys where it's like, hey, you know what? Come out of the SEC. Come up here. See what happens. Right. And I think especially the sell of Steve Belichick will always be there. I think that's the other side of this equation is you can look, Steve can say, look what I did with the linebackers. Just imagine what we have with you at defensive line. That's the same exact sell. And then when you see all those linebackers coming in behind these guys, if I'm a defensive lineman or a defensive tackle, it's like, oh, I got those guys behind me and Bala's coaching them. I know what he's like. Yeah, sign me up. Those are the type of guys that you need to go get, not necessarily I'm not saying FCS is a bad thing, but we've kind of seen some of those guys take a little bit longer to come along. And Valdez has been fine. But I mean, absolutely get 1 or 2 of those guys, not 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Sort of thing.
But this is the whole thing when it comes to relying on the spring transfer portal window from last season, where Cameron Broussard has been effective. Obviously, Valdez was not that guy because he came in the winter portal. But you think about some of the guys that came into the spring portal through the FCS ranks. You can still find good players because I hear your point. I agree. I try to make it extra clear before we get out of here because I'm not opposed to taking FCS players at all, but it's a healthy mix. I think that's a great point where you take. If you can find a way to get one Sebastian Valdez with 2 guys that are looking for a new home from the ranks of the FBS, whether it be a step up from the group of 5 or maybe somebody from another Power 4 school that wants to come over, there are ways to make it work at all these positions, but it starts in the trenches. That's why we want to make sure we spend so much time harping on it because that's where it starts. Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you every day is tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. Thank you so much for making Locked On Huskies your first listen today. Now for your second listen, check out the Locked On Big Ten podcast. Our guy Craig Sheeman puts the Big Ten first. When everyone else overlooks it, you can find Locked On Big Ten on YouTube or wherever else you listen to your podcasts. And please make sure you subscribe to this podcast wherever you get it, whether it be YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating the channel through content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you don't miss when we post a new video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please give us a 5-star review. It does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Tuesday.